Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into connection.
Yeah, what it means to connect with each other, with our beliefs, maybe something, bigger than us.
Exactly. And we've got some really interesting sources lined up. We're looking at Acts 15.
Which is that key moment in the early church.
Right. And Psalm 122, that sense of community joy.
Then John 15, the vine metaphor.
And Psalm 16, which is more personal, a declaration of faith.
It's quite a mix. Historical narrative, poetry, metaphor, personal reflection.
We know you want to get the key insights quickly and really understand this stuff, so that's the plan.
Yeah, distill it down. Find those core themes running through these different voices. It's about this fundamental human need for, connection.
Absolutely. And these aren't just old questions, are they? I mean, how do we build real community around shared values today?
And how do we keep that personal connection alive, that link to something, beyond the everyday?
Good questions. Okay, let's start with that critical moment, Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council.
Right. So Acts 15, it lays out this pretty significant debate happening.
What was the core issue?
It boils down to this. So people came down from Judea and started teaching the believers, specifically the non-Jewish believers, the Gentiles,
Okay.
that unless they were circumcised and followed the law of Moses, the whole traditional package, they couldn't actually be saved.
Wow. So a direct challenge.
A huge one. And Paul and Barnabas, who've been working extensively with Gentiles, they strongly disagreed. It led to, the text says no small dissension and debate.
I bet. So what happened?
The church saw this couldn't just be argued about locally. So they decided to send Paul and Barnabas and some others up to Jerusalem.
To talk to the top leadership.
Exactly. To the apostles and the elders to get this settled. It really shows the early church trying to figure things out, that tension between, the old ways and this new thing happening with the Gentiles.
And the journey itself sounds interesting.
It does. As they traveled through Phoenicia and Samaria, they told everyone about the Gentiles turning to faith.
And how was that received?
With great joy, actually. The text says it brought joy to all the brothers and sisters. So expansion wasn't seen as a bad thing by everyone.
Interesting contrast there. So they get to Jerusalem.
And they're welcomed by the church, the apostles, the elders. They share everything God had done through them.
But the issue didn't just disappear, right?
No. The text specifically mentions that some believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees stood up.
Ah, the Pharisees.
Yeah. And they insisted. They said it is necessary to circumcise them and to order them to keep the law of Moses.
Still holding that line, why were they so attached, do you think? Was it just heritage or something deeper?
Well, that's a key question, isn't it? For them, the law wasn't just like cultural habit. It was seen as the core of their covenant with God.
A foundation.
Right. So the challenge was, how do you reconcile that deeply held belief with what they were seeing God do among people outside that tradition?
Tricky stuff.
Definitely. So the apostles and elders gathered together specifically to look into this matter. It's a real snapshot of a community wrestling with its identity, its boundaries, and what faith truly required.
Okay. So that's the struggle for community definition. Now let's shift to Psalm 122. It feels like a different mood entirely.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Psalm 122 is just radiating joy. Communal joy.
It starts with, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord.
Yeah, you can almost feel the excitement, can't you? That shared anticipation of going somewhere sacred together. It really speaks to how shared rituals, shared spaces, they forge these incredibly strong bonds.
Turns individual faith into something collective.
Precisely. And then that line, our feet have been standing within your gates, O Jerusalem.
It's very physical, very present.
Yes. It's not just an idea. It's the feeling of arrival, of being there together in this incredibly significant place.
And Jerusalem itself is described.
How was it? Bound firmly together. Bound firmly together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It suggests, not just the buildings, but the people. Interconnected, united by their shared faith, their shared purpose in being there.
And the psalm mentions the tribes going up.
The tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord.
So it emphasizes that historical communal obligation. This is what they do.
Right. It's part of their identity, decreed for them. And it links this worship directly to giving thanks.
It also mentions thrones for judgment, the house of David.
Yes. Thrones for judgment were set there, the thrones of the house of David. So it weaves together worship, justice, and the established leadership or history of their people.
It's a very complete picture of a unified community.
It really is. The core feeling is that deep solidarity and joy you find when people come together for worship, especially in a place loaded with meaning.
Okay, so we've seen communal struggle and communal joy. Let's switch gears again to John 15. This is more about the individual connection, right? The vine and branches.
Absolutely. This is one of the most powerful metaphors, I think. Very personal, very relational.
Jesus says, I am the true vine.
And my Father is the vine dresser. So you have the source of life, Jesus, and the one tending it, God the Father. It immediately sets up this idea that vitality, life itself, depends on being connected to the source.
It's a principle you see everywhere, really, not just spiritually.
True. Any system needs connection to its core to thrive.
But then it gets a bit intense. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away.
And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit.
Okay, the pruning part. That can sound kind of harsh, can't it? Is it punishment?
That's a fair question. It can sound harsh, but look at the goal. That it may bear more fruit? The removal part is stark, yes. But the pruning of fruitful branches, that sounds more like refinement.
Like cutting away the unnecessary stuff.
Exactly. Removing what hinders growth, what stops it from being even more productive. It's about becoming more effective, perhaps.
Okay, that makes sense. And Jesus reassures them too, right? He says something about being clean.
Yes, he tells the disciples, already you are clean because of the word that I've spoken to you.
Yeah.
So the potential is there. The connection through his teaching, his relationship with them, has already prepared them in a way.
And then the core instruction, abide in me and I in you.
That's the heart of it. Abide, remain, stay connected.
Because
As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. It's crystal clear. Fruitfulness, spiritual life, it's impossible without that connection.
and the consequences of not abiding.
Also very clear in the metaphor. The branch is cut off, it withers, people gather them, throw them into the fire, and they're burned.
Doesn't mince words.
No. It underlines just how vital that dependence on Christ is meant to be seen.
But there's a positive side too. Abiding leads to.
Powerful prayer. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. It suggests this deep alignment with God's will when you're truly connected.
And the purpose of all this fruit bearing.
By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. So it's about honoring God and showing the reality of that connection through its results. The core takeaway is that absolute reliance on Christ for any spiritual life or growth.
Which leads us nicely into Psalm 16. This feels like someone actually living out that abiding principle.
Yes, Psalm 16 has this tone of deep personal trust and stability.
The psalmist says, I have set the Lord always before me.
Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. It's a deliberate choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Actively keeping God central as the source of security.
That sense of stability comes from that focus.
Exactly. It suggests that resilience, that sense of purpose, it's rooted in intentionally maintaining that connection to your core beliefs to God.
And the notes we have link this directly back to John 15.
You do. They reflect on how, like those branches, our lives only bear fruit when we remain in Jesus.
Yeah.
It emphasizes that this isn't passive. It mentions staying connected through specific things. Prayer, obedience, love. These are actions choices. They're presented as vital for spiritual thriving.
And what happens if that connection weakens?
The reflection suggests our efforts can lose their meaning. Our hearts can grow distant. We sort of drift away from that foundation.
So it's a call to be active, intentional.
Very much so. There's even a direct question posed. What can you do today to stay more closely united with Jesus? Followed by a prayer asking for help to remain, to be pruned for good fruit, to grow.
Really practical personal application.
And it ends by asking you, the listener, what specific step will you take today to deepen your connection to Christ? It really brings it down to that individual level. Faith requires conscious effort, nurturing that relationship.
Okay. We've looked at these 4 distinct sources. Let's try and synthesize them a bit. What connections or contrasts really jump out?
Well, think about Acts 15, the church council trying to figure out who's in, who's out, what are the rules.
Right, that communal decision-making.
And then Psalm 122, with that image of Jerusalem as a city bound firmly together. Both seem to highlight how important unity and shared understanding are for a community of faith.
Whether it's through hashing out theology or worshiping together.
Exactly. There's a need for that cohesive identity.
And then you contrast that with John 15 and Psalm 16.
Yes. Acts 15 is wrestling with, you could say, external requirements, circumcision, the law. But John 15 is all about the internal reality abiding in Christ.
And Psalm 16 is about that personal stance, setting the Lord always before you.
Right. So you have this interplay. Acts deals with the structure, the who belongs. John and the Psalm deal with the individual's interconnection, the dependence on the spiritual source.
Are they opposing ideas or complementary?
I'd say complementary. It seems both are presented as vital. You need the community structures, the shared identity, and you need that deep, personal, individual connection for a healthy spiritual life. They work together.
What about that pruning idea from John 15? Does that connect anywhere else?
That's interesting. You could perhaps see the debates and struggles in Acts 15 as a kind of communal pruning.
How do you mean?
Well, maybe those difficult discussions, even the disagreements, were necessary for the early church to clarify its core beliefs, to cut away confusion, and ultimately to grow stronger and more focused.
Huh. That puts a different spin on conflict. Makes you think about difficult times in your own life or groups you're in. Maybe they served a purpose.
It's possible. Growth isn't always comfortable, is it? Whether for a person or a community.
Right.
Pruning, by definition, involves cutting things back.
True. And maybe the kind of joy we see in Psalm 122, maybe that's the outcome, the result of achieving the kind of clarity and unity they were searching for in Acts 15, fueled by the kind of personal abiding talked about in John 15 and Psalm 16.
That's a beautiful thought. That the deep joy of belonging comes after working through the difficulties and staying rooted in the source.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've seen the early church wrestling with what community means, who belongs, that's Acts 15.
The struggle with inclusion and belief.
We've felt the power of communal unity and shared worship in Psalm 122.
That sense of belonging together.
And we've explored the absolute necessity of that individual, vital connection to a spiritual source through the vine metaphor in John 15 and the personal trust in Psalm 16.
Dependence and intentionality.
And threading through it all is this idea of growth, refinement, sometimes through pruning, sometimes through difficult conversations.
Yeah, I think the real aha moment maybe is seeing how these very different kinds of texts, history, poetry, metaphor, all point to these fundamental human needs.
Belonging, purpose.
Connection to something beyond ourselves. And how these needs get met both in community and in our personal spiritual lives.
So for you listening, maybe take a moment to think about your own connections.
Yeah, the communities you're part of. What holds them and you together? What are those core values?
And how are you actively tending to your own connection, to your deepest beliefs, your sense of purpose, to, whatever you see as transcendent?
It leads to a final thought, maybe something to chew on.
Go for it.
If the early church, right at the beginning, had to really wrestle with what it meant to belong and how to grow.
Like we saw in Acts.
And if Jesus himself used this metaphor of constantly abiding, but also needing pruning for more fruit.
John 15.
Then the question for you becomes, what fruit are you maybe being called to bear right now in your own life, your own situation?
Yeah, and following that.
What might need to be pruned? What habits maybe, or ways of thinking, or even commitments to allow for that deeper connection and greater growth?